job. Yes.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Robin, and this is our very first episode of Angry Lunchtime Chats with the Radical Restart team. We're doing this on a bit of a whim because we were sat around the table having a cool chat at lunchtime, so we thought we might as well record it and send it out to you all. I'm here with... Bloody hell, you two are terrible at this. Okay, I'm here...
I just like it because you just launched straight into like this whole... like you went from Robin to podcast to Robin, just like snap of the finger.
What?
It's really, no, I like it. I like the rest of it. I was like, why's Robin doing the intro? Oh yeah, because Robin's good at intros, but it just made me laugh. I'm over it now.
Do you want to do the intro?
Hey everybody, welcome to the first On a Whim podcast that we're making as our Angry Lunchtime Chats. We talk about things all the time, and we were like, we would like to share them with more people. If you're interested and your lunchtime to listen to our Angry Lunchtime Chats. So it's Meg, Robin and Freya. I pointed at the wrong people, but you guys can't see that, so that's okay.
Yeah, we're not very good at recording yet. You might have learned that.
Okay,
What did we talk?
me
What
and
did we
Freya
talk?
don't mind.
What did we
Robin's
talk?
really stressed
What did we
about
talk?
We're not doing it right.
Because I have to edit it anyway.
No, you don't have to edit it.
What did we?
Just send them
No,
in.
I just mean to make it even so people can hear it. What did we talk about at lunchtime? You two. Well, Freya stayed up all last night
Yes.
being pissed about people going to university in the face of societal collapse.
Yeah. Societal.
Societal.
Yeah. I have this image in my head at the moment that keeps coming into my head, which is of a big asteroid hanging in the sky, like really high up, but it's coming really slowly. But sometimes I remember it and I see it and I'm like, fuck, there's this big asteroid. And I just got really, I was thinking about that and then I got really angry because lots of my friends see the big asteroid but then they go and run away to university and like study but don't actually do anything.
Yeah. And by you mean do anything? I mean, one of the things we were talking a bit about like how it links with like dissociation, like a feeling like it becomes a space in which people can run away from that anxiety or can run away from a stepping into that like, well, if I believe stuff's really crap and I have these analysis of the world or whatever, then let's go and do something about it.
Yeah, let's build shit.
Let's build shit, let's connect with community, let's grow stuff. And instead it feels like people are like, panic, I'm going to go do
Study
university.
sociology.
Yeah, study politics.
Yeah.
And that it just fits into... Yeah, and that especially for those of us young people. I mean, Frey, you went to uni and said no.
Yes, I went to uni and said no. I went there and then the dissonance is just very intense. And I've noticed that a lot of people, like a lot of my friends, go to uni thinking that they can keep up their activism and keep up their like non-dissonance, like their panic about the world and the feeling of the need to build things, to make change, to like really be present with the crises, but then just go into this dissociative trance state of, like being at Cambridge and doing fucking polo or whatever it is you do in Cambridge, going up to, going far away and disconnecting and being like, okay, I need to protect myself, and what my socialisation has told me is that if I go to university, at least I've got some stability, I'll have a degree, I won't have to think about things for quite a while. But then the thing is, it's like you're only delaying your kind of reaction, because you can dissociate for a while, but after you get out, like it's like 4 years, and then what? Like, what do you do when you come out of university? Are you going to, like, the crisis will still exist, all of these things will still exist, and you'll come out and you won't have built anything. Yeah.
I like that thing Freya was saying earlier about this idea that people go into, like, you're in university and this, like, I'll do stuff when I'm out of university, and it's like, well, like you said, like, they're not building anything. Nothing's going to be, like, different apart from, well, we'll be further down the road of the fuckery, and, like, how... people are going to come out of university at the end, and what are they going to do? Are they going to join people doing organising, like grassroots organising, Some of them say they will, but then in which case, why aren't they doing that now? Or are they going to go and get a job with a big NGO and sell their soul to the NGO industrial complex and work in an office every day? Like, you know, and obviously that's a very black and white way of looking at it. Like, there's a lot more nuance in there than that. But this idea of, like, people going to university is just, like, delaying these decisions. Like, they're feeling the dissonance, and then rather than turning it into action or change, they're just going, like, oh fuck, well that's a bit scary, I'll deal with it later. And you know, and the stories that they're running on, I guess, or I would say the stories they're running on, is this, like, still the idea that they'll be better equipped to deal with what they need to deal with, like, or what we all need to deal with when they come out the other end of university, especially people that are studying, like, politics, or, like, what's it called, sustainable development and all those kind of things. Like, these ideas that, oh, I'll learn the skills I need to be able to better challenge this stuff when I come to the other end. But that's just, like, buying into a bunch of the stories around, like, you know, intellectual understanding being the best way of, you know, being able to engage with the world and change stuff. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about around schooling and education, and actually, like, in our opinion, given the bunch of the work we've done, going through, like, higher education or the education system, like, in this society, actually in many ways gets you further from where you need to be in being able to change stuff. Like, your imagination is further killed, you're further schooled into this, like, intellectual hierarchy, you're more disconnected from your imagination and all of these things, like, more disconnected from each other, and more, I don't know, it just feels to me like a funny, the idea that you go to university and you'll come out the other end of it better equipped to deal with stuff feels funny, considering the analysis that a bunch of those people themselves, and, like, the work that we've been doing have of the university system and the way it so-called educates, and, like, the role it plays in society.
Then what are you talking about? I think, and maybe we can get back to that in a minute with the, like, what we actually think about universities. But this piece of, like, you know, I'm whatever on the slightly older end of youth, so 27. I went to uni ages ago. Finished uni in 2017. Did my 4 years, got my degree. You know, got my master's in renewable energy engineering, which lots of people will be like, yeah, that's super useful, isn't it? Like, you've done something really relevant and that kind of thing. And yet, understanding that even then, my course was super conceptual. I learned very few, like, basic, like, actually kind of practical, tangible skills. And it was all set up around concepts of, like, you know, big green, like the green revolution kind of thing. And at no point did we learn about, you know, in the time since I started doing activism, and I started doing activism partly because I was like, well, the piece here that has to change is the societal piece, is the political piece, it's the social piece, it's the why are we not, you know, changing. It's not the, you know, not the technology stuff. But then even into the technology space, like, you know, I was lucky enough to go to Chile a couple of years ago, and I met people out there who were, you know, had their whole communities, indigenous people had their whole communities destroyed by, you know, one of the world's largest, if not the largest, copper mine in the world. And that copper mine's, like, tagline is, like, you know, the copper to fuel the green revolution. And it's just this point of, like, at university there was that reconnection of what I was studying, even though it was, like, climate aware and stuff, into a concept of, like, you know, capitalist extractivism, into imperialism, into why is it okay for us to build wind turbines here based on copper that's been extracted at, you know, historical kind of slave created prices in another part of the world and killed people, and none of that conversation existed. So it just kind of is almost, I don't know, it just feels like so much of the university space is so, like, malaised into this idea of,
what does malaised mean?
Kind of like a sleeping, I don't know, I think of it like a sleeping, like, illnessy kind of, like, you're just, like, drifting through, like, it's sucked into this kind of idea of what we call, like, Western extractivist shittery, basically, all the fuckery you guys keep talking about. And so there's that thing of it being like, you know, I went to uni and I did it, and did it prepare me any more for the world? I don't know. I'm better at planning solar panel farms now, but no one wants to build them anyway because the Tories have fucked it up. And so there's this thing about, you know, being 4 years further down the line, and the fact that my mates aren't trying to go to uni anymore, but we've been organising for the last 2 years, and your mates, you both have, like, 4 or 5 plus friends who were doing stuff, like doing organising, and who have now gone, sorry, you have more friends than that, mate. Who were doing shit with us and diving into things, and have now gone off to uni.
Yeah.
Sorry. I guess I was kind of feeling this thing of like, both on an emotional level and an intellectual level. I can't quite grasp what this thing of like, why people, you know, because you speak to a lot of people and they're like, oh, well, I can't do anything, or oh, well, you know, like, it's not going to work, or whatever. But like, if people hold any understanding of like the situation we're in, which most people do, like, you know, whatever, on different levels and stuff, but if you hold any understanding of the situation we're in, how is people's like fear of not being able to do the right thing bigger than their feeling of needing to try? And obviously for a bunch of people, like, I'm very privileged that I don't have like a hard edge of, you know, like my economic stability, for example, because of my family privilege and stuff like that. I don't have to exist in a fear about that most of the time in my life. But I know a bunch of people who are in the same position as me, whose fear of not being able to succeed, of like being a failure, of, you know, I guess just the fear of whatever, the end of the world kind of vibe, or the end of the world as we know it, like, is bigger than their like, well, I've got to try. And I can't quite understand that, both on an emotional level and an intellectual level.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to like, one of the big things for me that I see in that is like stability, like what we view stability as, because I think a lot of the fear comes from like, oh, there's like this big intangible future instability that's going to happen to me, but right now I need some kind of stability that's not like, that's kind of like not thinking about that instability, but like, what have I don't know, how do I explain it? It's like
I mean, you used to talk about the difference between like institutional stability and like community stability.
Yeah, so there's like this lack of trust that people have, or lack of awareness that like community stability could exist. And that you could actually, like, instead of going for that bureaucratic stability of like degree, you know, like I've got this contract that means that I'm definitely going to have this place to live for this amount of time, and I'm going to learn this thing, and at the end I'll have this degree, and then I'll get this job, and like that kind of like soulless, mechanical sense of stability that, you know, your body's going to be alive for this amount of time, so long as you keep, you know, like doing the work and doing the things that the system is telling you to do and all of this stuff. Whereas there's like people who feel the fear of like the climate crisis often go straight to that stability, because they're like, this is what I've been taught, this is what I know is going to protect me for this amount of time, and I can just not think about the, you know, social collapse that's in the future whilst I protect myself for this amount of time, and then when I come out I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't have to think about it. Whereas like, if you went on the other side of like, you know, looking at the communities that have been built around this activism and been built around like the idea that society is going to collapse soon, you know, like deep adaptation stuff, transformative justice, transformative communities, these things that aren't what we're taught are going to protect us, but actually, you know, you feel it in a more embodied way, that it's going to hold you in a way that isn't just on a contract, because you have the money and you have the degree and you have the, you know, willingness to submit to stuff.
And do you guys bring this? Because one of the things we talked about earlier, and why we, in our angry lunchtime chats, was that you both were saying you struggle. This is why I said earlier that you guys have friends there right now. Obviously I do through the organising as well, but these people you've grown up with and stuff. And it's like, why do you bring these conversations to them in this way? Or is there a struggle, you know, what's the struggle there? And then, so, because in some part, what you were saying earlier, it felt like you were saying you have to like sit with your anger. Like, in some ways you're actually quite annoyed about this. This isn't just like, oh, I'm a bit sad that my friends aren't, you know, diving in and stuff. This is like, there's actually some like, hey, kind of like, fuck you, like some anger in there. But it feels, you also talk about feeling unable to bring that to people very often.
Yeah, it's just hard to, like, well, I mean, on a just on an interpersonal level, it's quite hard to turn around to your friends and be like, I'm really angry at you and I think your life choices are wrong. Like, that's just quite hard to do, especially in a society where we've been, you know, as people like racialized as white, or especially as people who are English, like conflict is seen as like don't bring conflict, like that will disrupt the stability, like all of that stuff. And you know, in a patriarchal society against transformation, like that whole idea of like, you know, you shouldn't bring all of yourself to relationships, because you know you need to hold on to the relationship at the expense of what's actually important a lot of the time. But yeah, I don't know, that got a bit meta, but basically it's just hard to bring this stuff to your friends, because you're like, you know, you're risking losing a part of a relationship, and because people are mad defensive, and because you also like I understand a lot of why people go to university. Like I understand it. I'm just not in the same place of feeling like that's a choice that I would want to make, or that I think other people should necessarily make. Obviously depending on different people's stories and situations, but I guess it's just like, yeah, it's also hard to just turn around and say like, you're wrong, I'm right. I guess it's something that I feel, because I'm not necessarily always very confident to say to people like, listen to me, my ideas are right. But I think it's just hard, like when people often respond with so much defensiveness as well, because this is such, like we said, like this comes, people are making these choices out of massive dissonance, or out of fear, or out of like need to belong. What does it mean to be alive and growing up and the future and all that shit? Like this is lots of big or family pressure, or societal pressure, or like you know feeling the need to get a job to have a bunch of stability. Like the reasons people make choices to go to university is quite deep, I guess. And that like, so then when you challenge people on that, they get very defensive.
Yeah, and you're asking them to risk something that they really, really don't want to, and do something that like is going to put them in a position of like, you know, instability, and it's really scary. And I think it's also about like, you're asking them to actually like kind of face the truth of what the future is, and that goes a lot more deep than just being like, drop out of university. It's like, your future is not what you thought it was going to be. You know this, but I'm like trying to remind you of it in your dissonance, and it's like people don't want to hear that. And they don't want to feel that, because if they have to feel that, then they know they will drop out, and there's like quite a lot of uncertainty there, because I think we're just like kind of taught to trust in the systems that were designed to keep us in a kind of static place. And once you start trying to step out of that, you don't know what's ahead of you, and you don't know what's going to happen.
Well, go on.
I guess it's that thing, like for me, and this is whatever part of the reason we decided to record this conversation rather than just have it amongst ourselves and then go on with our day. It was like wanting to push that within ourselves a little bit, like the fear of challenging people, because I don't know, this is bigger than ourselves and our own like, you know, like complicated emotional relationships with our friends as well, and like and also that I guess what we believe we're actually trying to do is like, I guess we're asking people to step off a path to a place where we're all like a bunch more alive and actually doing what the world is needed for the world and for ourselves. But just that thing of like, this is bigger than like our insecurities, and we need to, I don't know, this is like our generation and our future. And I don't know, people going to university here is in many ways, I believe, like especially like somebody who's going into university with a bunch of privilege, who has a stability to step off that path, and that, or you know, a form of stability to step off that path, like is a betrayal of our generation in some ways. Like it's a betrayal of.
You mean if you carry on
the
conveyor belt when you have the ability
to step off of it, then that's like a betrayal of our generation and future generations, and like people around the world that like whatever, university is fundamentally like a brutally colonial system, and people around the world have, you know, kill themselves every day in an effort to join this hierarchy of whatever educational fuckery, because of the lies that have been sold around, look, get to here and you'll be happy, come to Oxford, you'll be happy, you'll get a good degree, you'll be stable, you can be the, you know, whatever. And that just like, just going into that system unquestioningly, to continue that conveyor belt, to continue the lie that this is the best way to grow up into the world, you know, to continue to not challenge what role that cog in this big machine plays, you know, and like Rob said, like as people that are able, any people that are able to step off that conveyor belt but don't, to me, it feels like a betrayal of our generation and of the world and all the things that are needed, you know, and again, understanding why people do it. And we all live in a level of dissonance. We're all doing things every day because of whatever. This isn't like this is the one bad thing and all of that stuff, but it just feels like I want to get a lot, like for me personally, I want to get a lot better at calling people out or calling people into this conversation.
Yeah, definitely calling people into it, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
Lots of people don't have access to the kind of conversations that, you know, we've been doing this stuff full time now for a while, and
exactly,
you get a bit more chance to just like have these conversations and sit around and talk about and build an idea of what the education system is. And you touched on it bits there, and that idea of the education system is this like pillar of our society, this pillar of what holds up effectively like the coloniality of the global system. The idea that, you know, one of our friends that we organise with, you know, she grew up in Colombia, and she talks about ever since the age of like 6 or 7, her dream was to go to Oxford. Like, why is it that a young woman growing up in Colombia has a dream to go to Oxford University? Is it because we live in a world where Oxford is just really good at education, and they chatted to people around the world and they made friends, and, you know, people are just like, oh, actually, I really want to go there to study this thing? Or is it because Oxford was used for hundreds of years as a space to bring people from, you know, colonies, from invaded territory, bring them, effectively almost like forcibly educate them in whiteness, and then send them back to perpetuate that idea of empire, and thus become the greatest educational space in the world, purporting to teach teach the leaders of the next generation. And so our friend in Colombia is it's that story that's been sold to her. You know, and now she's rejecting that and working against it in all these different pieces. She still just did a master's at Oxford. Anyway, that's a whole other story. We won't at you too much, Sarah. We love you. But that piece, I guess, of like what the education system is fundamental to our entering into this conversation. So I guess I wanted to ask you both, like, what are the things that, because this isn't, like you say, it's a calling into conversation. It's not like the black and white, like, this is wrong, this is right. What we're doing in terms of, you know, working to set up, you know, for people who don't know, we're building this educational training space for youth organisers, for youth activists in Stroud. Like, we've been trying to develop campaigns against the education system, doing climate organising for the last 2 years, doing solidarity organising full time. And you know, it's not just like, don't go to uni, do this.
No.
There's nuance, there's space in here, but I guess what we talked about earlier was a bit of like, if people are going to go to university, what is it that you would want to see from them? And then also, what is it that's helped you, as a couple 20-year-olds, decide not to go down that path and instead, you know, have the belief to invest in stepping off it?
Yeah. Well, it's about how we view our learning and how we view education, how we value it, because like right now, like you said, it's the university system is grounded in colonialism, it's grounded in whiteness, and through that it's also grounded in like this deeply extractivist view of knowledge, deeply disconnected and deeply extractivist. Like I was saying earlier, I think it's a good way of saying it. It's like a knowledge safari, because you're going and you're protected, you know, you're in this bubble, you're in this truck, and you're driving through a piece of land that isn't yours, and you're looking at these animals that you're not at all connected to and that you're not at all linked with. And you know,
like, this is interesting.
This is so interesting. I'm so glad I'm going to go back and tell everyone about how interesting it was. And, you know, I'm not connected to that land, I'm not connected to that community, I'm not connected to this or that. And it's like this like thing of like, extracting information because you find it interesting and because you want to learn about it, but not to any end. It's just to the end of finding things interesting, finding them, like being able to write a really interesting complex dissertation on something without actually ever affecting change with what you've written, because it's not, you don't have a stake in it, you're disconnected from what you're learning, and it's not about like, oh, I have this problem and I really need to solve this problem, so I'm going to go to university, I'm going to work it out, I'm going to bring it back to my community and we're going to solve it together. It's like about like, this is my personal journey of what I want to learn for myself, and I'm not going to take that knowledge and do anything with it. I'm just doing it because I'm interested in it and I want to take from it. And it's like, that's kind of what it's become, and what like the kind of whole knowledge system is based on now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key things for me about like people going to university, and like what's different. One of the key differences for me between what would be going to university in an effort to disrupt all of the shitness of it, or of, you know, and you know, bring stuff back into the real world, and what's going to university on like a extractivist, like, I don't know, in like blunt terms, like self-serving. And I don't mean self-serving in like that's necessarily a really bad thing, but like university as it currently in its current form is about the individual, and is about the individual's pursuit of knowledge, the individual's pursuit of career, the individual's like pursuit of status. And people go into university, and even if they go in with a bunch of intentions, like, I'm going to do this because this will make me better at learning this stuff, it's like, it's still very individualized. And I think like Frey just touched on it, and I know I've kind of thought about this a bit before, like this, like going into university not as an individual, or not solely with your own interests or your own dissonance or your own whatever. It's like, how do you go in and how do you bring what you learn back to your community, or how do you bring what you learn out into the real world, or how do you call the people in your university out for the way they're showing up, and how do you make it about more than just you and your own journey through life, and instead make it about the world and your community and the people around you, and, you know, the human and more than human relationships that we need to kind of get anywhere that's not just very downhill.
Yeah, in practical sense, you guys have not, like, you're talking there about what people who, you know, are going down this route of going to university in the now, and, you know, knowing what time it is, you know, so what does that look like on a practical level? That looks like them doing a lot of organising, I guess, in university spaces. A lot of, you know, because lots of people, this thing about like going there as part of a community, lots of people, especially young people racialised as white, don't have that community. You know, we're not coming from a, you know, we don't have a town hall, we don't have a, you know, we don't have a street that get together, we don't have neighbourhood organisations that we're taking into that space and that we're there almost, you know, linked to and sharing stuff. So a lot of that is then about like community crafting, I feel, at universities, and regaining that idea of what learning communities are, what student communities are, how your community of students sits within the wider view of your university, sits within the national view, sits within the international view of what hierarchy and power dynamics play within universities. So I feel like there's a lot of that to do, but we also hold this phrase sometimes of like, I guess, one of the things I was bringing is like, for me, if I was to go to university in the now, compared to when I went, you know, 8 years ago, I would need to hold this view of, if I'm not ready to get kicked out to do what I believe is necessary to change this space and impact the world,
like as soon
then
as you're...
then why am I going? Because the forces working to co-opt me in that space are too powerful.
Yeah, and as soon as you're, like you said, like you remaining in university or getting a mark on your dissertation becomes more important than, like the organising or what you're standing up for, actually what is right and what needs to change, and building something and creating something. Then that's for me when, exactly like Brooke just said, like you're being co-opted and you're complicit, I guess, is like maybe a word I'd use, in the like continuation of that, of all of it, rather than standing against it. And because university is like one of the only places where young people really are able to gather anymore, because we're so told that we have to go. So there's just like, that's one of the only places where there's just like loads of post-school young people all together, and that makes it a really important space for organising, because it's a really important platform and a really important place to like connect and be able to build strength. But like ultimately it's about taking power away from university as an institution and putting that power into the students so that they can choose whether or not they want to be defined by this, you know, by this system, by university, by Cambridge, by Oxford, whatever. Like they need to be able to take that power away, and also take, like, I think there's a thing about like taking that like center of knowledge away, because right now the control over
what's knowledge and what isn't is really held by university, and that's why like people gather around it to learn. But like moving that into the young people is like a really important step, I think, to taking that power away. And we were talking about that a lot yesterday, because we've been doing these learning circles around like what education means, and we were talking about the idea of kind of learning through experience, and what is a teacher, and why do we have teachers that are so detached from their knowledge and have so much power over their students. And it's because like young people aren't taught that knowledge is kind of within themselves rather than just like within an institution. So that power is always being held within that institution because that's where the learning is, that's where the knowledge is. You kind of go there to receive rather than to discover. Yeah,
it's, you know, we talk a lot about some of our inspirations. I mean, we have them on the wall behind us. We've got Paulo Freire over there, we've got Bell Hooks, people who are foundational in our understandings of what education could be, how education could be challenged, and that idea of the big shift between banking methods. You know, a university is there so a student can go and have knowledge deposited in the student, and thus the student is then valuable. That's the banking method, instead of the idea that the student is inherently valuable and is full, brimming with experience, curiosity, imagination from the world, and thus needs to enter into spaces that invite that out of them, that invite that vulnerability, invite that curiosity, invite that, you know, that questioning self that can take on challenges. And from my experience at university is obviously the first model. And that's the point of universities in our current world, because they hold this prestige, they hold this, you need to get to university because without us, you won't succeed.
Yeah,
you know?
and that's, you know, that's us living in a society where, we talk about this a lot with the schooling system, but university system is just like the upper level of this, like living in a society which fundamentally is telling you that if your brain doesn't work in these ways, these specific intellectual ways, in fact, these specific intellectual, disembodied, ableist, like whatever ways, then you're less valuable to society. And obviously there's a bunch of nuance in that conversation now, and people do talk about this and whatever, but still on a very practical level, if you go to university, you'll be able to get a higher paying, better job. Society is telling you you're more valuable, you're, you know, whatever. You don't deserve to live on the street like somebody that failed their A-levels. And it's like, it's going to university and being like, oh, when I come out of university, like I'll be able to better do what I'm trying to do, without challenging that fundamental idea that you come out of university and you're a more valuable human being because your brain works in these specific ways. It's just quite fucked up, I think. It's just not challenging. That's very, and this is not on individual people, but just thinking about that as a systemic situation that we find ourselves in, that there's this like extremely violent path of like hierarchy and selection. Not to mention all of the barriers of like how our society's set up to stop certain people getting there anyway. It's just like, I don't know, that feels like another part of the conversation that people who get to university often forget to have, because they forget that because they're the people that get there. And I just think that's also an important piece to remind everyone of.
Definitely. It made me think a little bit about what you were saying earlier about like self-serving. And we were listening to one of Bell Hooks, you know, one of the chapters in her Teaching to Transgress book yesterday when we were do our learning circle, and she talks there a lot about like the spiritual aspect of education, and this idea that education, you know, Freire talks about as well, education is a route to freedom, is a route to liberation, is a part of our spiritual searching towards who we are and how can we fully manifest ourselves, how can we fully be in the world. Obviously that's not how education is talked about in our world. But this piece of for me at least, education should be self-serving. It should be serving one in the pursuit of fully being self. And yet to be on that journey, you have to detach your idea of self from what we are given, which is the idea that our concept of self can only exist within these institutional frames, within this frame of what the world has done. So like, this idea that we have, or we are forced to have, that self exists on this path, the path, you know, the conveyor belt of school to uni to grad job to beyond, within that capitalist system. And so there's something here about that when your self your idea of self exists on that path, when that's who you think you are, then you're going to uni not in a self-serving way, a true, on the journey for freedom and liberation and selfhood. You're going to university having given up your idea of selfhood to the powers that organise that path. Yeah. So you're not self-serving, really. You're serving the systems of power that use university to hold our world effectively on a route to extinction. And that is a piece where people, how much, this question, I guess, and this is one of the things I hear when you guys talk about this question over and over again, is just like, how much have you really thought about going to university?
Yeah.
How much have you really felt about it? How much do you understand about the decision that you're making? Or is this the decision that you were prepared to make by a system that you talk about not even believing in?
Yeah.
And if you haven't done that work, to really analyse that decision, then is it, that thing of, is it being made for you? And that almost, it feels like some of the anger is in there. The anger in this, like, do you guys even believe in what you're doing?
Yeah.
Because you talk about that dissociation.
Like, it's not even for...
Are you just stepping out? It doesn't even feel like it's for you.
Yeah, because people go to university and it doesn't necessarily make them happy, and it doesn't make them more alive, and it doesn't get them closer to feeling like there's meaning in their lives. It gets them further away from a bunch of those places most of the time, even though they say they're going for those reasons. And I guess, I really agree with what you just said around, like, it's not actually self-serving, because connection to, like, ourselves and what it truly means to be alive and a person who's in love with the world is so far from the stories we're told about how you're supposed to live in this society.
Yeah, definitely. But it does feel safe, but it feels safe in ways that aren't even real. That we're, like, taught are real but aren't real, because you're taught you're going to be okay, but in reality, like, there's this deadline, and the deadline is coming, and going to university and getting a job, or going to university and doing this masters or whatever, is not going to it's not going to stop that. It's not going to save you from that. It's only going to make it worse. Yeah.
And that like we talk about, and we're obviously referring to young people here, but obviously, like, we know, like, young people across the world are living that right now and have been for a long time, and what those decisions mean, and this piece of this understanding that that all of this, these stories here, these stories that we have that we're not analysing. I don't think this is the bit where I get angry, I guess. And it's not angry necessarily at the people themselves. It's angry at the people who've, it's angry at parents, it's angry at systems, it's angry at teachers, it's angry in the space that it means that those young people, my friends, our peers here, haven't been given the opportunity to see that their ability to follow this path, their ability to dissociate and decide to go to university instead of standing up and stepping into that path of selfhood that we talk about, is based on the destruction of young people's lives across the world.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not, this whole thing, this phrase I like to say, if you're not growing your own food, you better make sure you're accountable to the people who are.
Yeah.
If you're able to go off and study, funded by a government that's almost all of its money is based on colonial plunder, go and study at these institutions that so many of them were founded with the money from that, and do that, as a bit of a piss up. And this was me 8 years ago. I went in and that kind of thing, but no one gave me the chance to see that situation. And so I was committed to this path that wasn't my own. I was committed, and in that process, I spent 4 years perpetuating the violence that system exhibits on my siblings across the world, on young people whose bodies are broken. Those young people mining in Chile, their bodies are literally broken to provide the copper at prices it should never be provided at for the wind turbines that I would practice making in my lab desk in university. And that's just such a dissociative space when you really enter that conversation about it. And for me, that that's the violence. That's the piece that makes me angry. And it's are people, I don't know, you don't call people out for not being brave, but are we ready to step into those conversations?
Yeah, because it's already not a neutral decision to go to university.
Yeah, not at all.
Like you're
never has been. Yeah,
never has been.
You know, like,
and it's. I guess I was just hearing what you're saying. Like it's almost like not angry at people, but angry for people. You know, and obviously whatever, there is a level of, we all have personal responsibility, and you know, we were born into positions we didn't choose, but we have responsibility to know what to do with that right now. And you can't say to anybody, oh well, they didn't know like this shit, so it's not their fault. But it's also like, yeah, that thing of like angry for people for the fact they've haven't had a chance to see this stuff, or angry that like for people that they're actually slowly destroying their own mental health in the pursuit of something they've told that's good for them, or angry for people that like they're being sold a lie that they'll come out the other end of this better, able to change the world, and instead just be more indoctrinated into it. So yeah, I think that's where a lot of my anger comes from.
Yeah, I think I have some personal anger as well, because I feel like I protect my friends who go to university from that anger, but I just like, we as a group and our friends and our community of people who are working like mad hard on this stuff are just like not enough. There isn't enough of us to be doing this, and like there needs to be more. And like, yes, we will be building things, and we're trying, and we're doing this, you know, we're doing this project where we're trying to create this training centre for youth activists, and it's really exciting, and it's happening, but it's happening slowly, and it could be happening faster. And there's so much other stuff that needs to get done, and so many people who are burnt out, and it's like,
and some people are just sat there being like, well, how do you know what you're going to do is going to work?
Yeah, and it's like, man, like, please just like actually stop trying to protect yourself, because ultimately, like, you're not protected anyway. Like, you're actually just not protected anyway. You're
protected at the expense of other people.
Yeah, you're going to come out of university, and either way the deadline's going to be closer, and either you've studied for 4 years about fucking anthropology or something, or like engineering, and all that knowledge that you've gathered already exists anyway. You come out at the other end and you've got new ideas, but things haven't been built because you've been spending all of this time doing loads and loads of studying on a bed of suffering. And it's like, yeah, we need this to happen now. We can't wait for everyone to finish their degrees for this to happen. So there is that panic there, but there's also lots of understanding that there's like so much fear and instability, and the world isn't designed for young people to be able to step into their power. So that stepping into that power has to be risky, and it has to be full of fear, and not everyone can do it, and like, yeah, but it needs to happen soon, and more people can do it than they think.
Definitely stepping into that power. And I guess, well, let's end here, because we're almost at 45 minutes. That was quick.
Wow.
Like we said at the beginning, both me and Meg introed it at the beginning, but this was our first on a whim angry lunchtime talks. And I guess we talked about it there, and this isn't an opportunity to call people out. This isn't an opportunity for us to sit down and be like, bash, 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 bash. What we're trying to do here, and what we try and do in all of our work as Radical Restart or as the Rise, is create moments where we're challenging this path. Create moments where we're inviting people to sink into the feeling around these kind of situations, around these conversations, and then, like we say, like really open yourself to the ability to make a decision from that space. Welcome the fear, welcome the hurt, welcome what's, being there, and then say, okay, how do I step forward? As me, as someone looking for selfhood, how do I step forward? And that for us is obviously the difference between calling out and calling in.
Yeah.
So we love all our friends, we love all these young people who are going, who are taking this decision, or this lack of decision at the moment, to go to university. But we're going to put this out into the world because we believe that these conversations have to happen. We believe in the potential that those young people hold to step into radical action, to step into change. And I guess, like Freya, you were saying at the end there, like we want you with us. Like we want people to come and join us, because, like, I don't know.
You're all way cooler than you think you are.
And it can be really joyful and full of community and yeah.
This is where the real, not right here obviously, but in spaces across the world and across the country and whatever, this is where the real life is actually happening.
I've learned an infinite amount more about myself, about how I want to live in the world, about the work that I feel like I need to do, the communities I want to build since leaving university than I ever did at university.
Yeah.
Yes, I could have taken it on more. I ran campaigns at uni, all these kind of things, and so it's that piece of, you know, what do people really want? And if you want community and to fight loneliness and to be with people in struggle and to connect and cry with each other and, you know, work to build a better world, then yeah, is university the place to be? That's like the fundamental question that we're asking here. And saying that it's okay to be angry about it because, you know, anger's kind of cool.
Yay.
Woo! Thanks everyone. See you maybe next time. We might never do this again.
Tomorrow.
We all have ADHD, so you might get 5 of these in 5 days and then none ever again, or we don't know.
Yeah.
But I've been Robin.
I've been Freya.
I'm still Meg.
You're still Meg. You haven't been Meg. And we'll buzz us any questions and shit. There was a lot in there. So
if anything struck anything with you and it made you angry back at us, then come and shout us and we can talk about it.
Yeah, come and stay. Maybe you'll drop out of university.
Hint, hint. You guys want to ask anyone just before we leave?
No, it's okay.
No, it's okay. Cool. Love you all. Bye.